We welcome you and everybody to another installment of Fielding the 68, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Rocco Miller and Brad Wachtel. We got a lot to break down for you guys today regarding the NCAA tournament, what the bubble looks like, some one seeds, and as always, we will have our full bracket posted on Field the 68 social media after the show concludes today. First and foremost, Brad, how are we doing, my man? Excited to have you on today.
Doing great. Glad to be back. Looking forward to, projecting the rest of the way. We got about less than 2 months to go. And, as we do every year, this is the best time of year.
Yeah, definitely the best time of year. And Rocco, I know you're coming off an appearance earlier in the week, getting back into the flow of things here with Bracketology. It's crazy that we're almost already in March.
It is. It's January 24th today. And so, what is it, 6 weeks away till Selection Sunday? We're going to have these resumes memorized by the time we get to March with how many times we go through the exercise, discuss these teams. And it's already permeating in my brain which teams have bad losses already, which teams need what. And so it's just going to be all fine-tuned from here on out. But, yeah, it makes you a little nostalgic because – the offseason is a long 7 months, a little bit more than 7 months in most cases if you don't get into March Madness. And we just sit around, wait for the season to start. Then it starts. Everybody else, not as diehard as us, gets obsessed with football. And now they're finally jumping on the bandwagon. And, sadly for them, they only get 6 weeks of this. But for us, it's a culmination of a lot of great stories. And we'll see who really can persevere leading into March.
And Rocco, we'll stick with you to start things out. Let's talk winners and losers from this past week of college hoops. Who sticks out to you as a primary winner over the course of the past week?
Yeah, sure, Brad. So I think in terms of bracketology, at the top here, Texas A&M made a big move. Crazy game. SEC on Tuesday night, I think, had 3 different games where the team who won barely led at all during the game. They combined to lead the game for less than 3 minutes. It was a crazy stat I saw out there. But in bracketology, Texas A&M's win at Ole Miss really moved the needle for them. It gave them their 5th win against the field, a second quality win on the road. And for A&M, they were barely into my top 16, almost out of the top 16 Monday. They jumped all the way to the 9th spot overall, which is the best of the 3 seeds. So Texas A&M really solidifying themselves. Now, again, if you're an Aggies fan, you got to root for the Rebels the rest of the way so that win continues to be as valuable as it is right now. But I was very impressed with them at the top. I think more towards the bubble, you might remember on Monday, Maryland was actually out of my field. They did not have a quad 1 win. They did not have a win away from home at all. And then they go into Illinois last night and change everything. They checked every box they needed in one game, which is rare to see, but Maryland achieved that. Not only did they achieve that, they won the game by 20 plus. I know Illinois was shorthanded, and basketball-wise, that matters. But Maryland already had very good performance numbers, measurements, and it was just a matter of, like we discussed on Monday, the Terps getting their way into the field where they're solidly one of the top 37 resumes, one of the 37 at-large belonging teams. Now they're clearly in there. And for me, they went from out of the field all the way to an 8 seed after doing all the scrubbing today based on some different results. And that leaves a team like UConn. They struggled again this week. They took a home loss over last weekend. And, a lot of these teams, even Maryland included, actually passed UConn on my seed list. That was surprising. And then also on the bubble, one other team to mention is Arizona State. I thought that win at West Virginia earlier this week changed everything for the Sun Devils once again. They have that now with the St. Mary's win, which is aging very well. St. Mary's is dominating the West Coast Conference. And they also have the win over New Mexico. So Arizona State in a bubble where you're looking for teams with any kind of solid wins, go into Morgantown and winning that game, and now having 3 wins against the field, Brad, all away from Tempe, I might add. The Sun Devils are looking good today.
Yeah, definitely in agreement on the Sun Devils. And Brad, throwing things to you now. Rocco ran us through some winners of this past week. Who are some losers who saw their stocks drop this past week in college hoops?
Yeah, first of all, I would have to say Nebraska is one of the bigger losers. Losing to USC at home is not the end of the world. USC actually rose up the ranks, and it was only a quad 2 loss. That doesn't kill them. The problem with Nebraska is they've been losing games. They really got to turn it around. They have that big win earlier in the season at Creighton, which is only going to carry you so far. They're just 2-6 in Big Ten play. And even though your conference record doesn't mean a whole lot when it comes to the NCAA tournament, Nebraska has to turn it around fast, or they're not making the NCAA tournament. And for me, they were a team that was in safely a few weeks ago, and now that definitely changed things over the last 2 weeks. The other team that I would say that hurt themselves is North Carolina. They lost at Wake Forest. It's not a bad loss, but when you play in the ACC, you only have so many opportunities, and a team like North Carolina needs wins. So every time you lose a game, it's going to hurt you, and they're a team that is on the bubble, and we'll get to it later where we have them. But I feel like that was significant for their resume earlier this week.
Yeah, it definitely felt significant, and obviously in a league like the ACC this year, wins are at a premium. You got to make sure that you're handling business. Rocco, coming back to you, did you feel like there was anybody that had a massive stock drop this week in college hoops that Brad didn't mention?
A little bit Illinois on the flip side of that Maryland result. Illinois was trending in an awesome direction in terms of their performance. They've looked like a Final Four contender on several performances, and I think they were shorthanded yesterday, so that might still be the case. I think it is the case, but unfortunately, you have to own what your resume and your results say on both sides of things, resume side and performance side, and it gave both sides a hit. And now Illinois barely squeezed into the top 16 for me. They were number 16 overall. So they're still a 4-seed protected seed in a position to make a run. But I think that really damaged their hopes maybe eventually to get to either a Big Ten championship or a 1-seed. Those types of things might have gone by the wayside. They've now got home losses to USC and Maryland. Maryland, of course, nothing wrong with losing to a team that talented, but it definitely took a little sting when you take a second home loss. You don't see very many very many 1-seeds over the years with 2 home losses, especially to teams that aren't near the top of the seed list. So tough night for the Illini, but all the dreams are still there for them.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they've got a lot to play for as we continue into the season, and time now to look at our 1-seeds. Of course, consensus 1-seeds coming to you guys for this week's bracketology. And obviously, there's a lot of continuity right now on the 1 line, or at least seemingly so. I know that you guys had pretty similar picks along the 1-seed line. Going to go first to Rocco here to talk about 2 of the 1-seeds here from our consensus 1-seeds. Rocco, talk to us a little bit about what you see on the 1 line as of right now, as this really feels like a big 4 that solidified themselves as the kings of college basketball.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'll start with Auburn and Duke. I'll let Brad take the heat for the next 2. But same as Monday, Auburn has earned that number 1 spot despite the loss at Duke. That's really not how the entire evaluation is done. It's your body of work. Who did you play? Where did you play? How did you do? And Auburn's just done a significant amount of damage. They have a road win at Georgia, of course. They have neutral court wins over Purdue, Houston, Iowa State, Memphis, North Carolina. The list goes on. And 5 of those wins land in what we call Quad 1A, which is the top half of Quad 1. It's what the committee looks like to separate high-level Quad 1 results from the rest of Quad 1. And anytime you get 5 wins or more in that category, it really stands out. And that compares to this number 2 team, which is Duke. Duke has 3 of those wins. Of course, one of them is against Auburn in Cameron. And Duke does have 2 really nice road wins. The win at Louisville is aging so well. Of course, Louisville hot. We'll talk about them later. They also have that great win at Arizona, a very tough building to win in. And performance-wise, the metrics are starting to barely lean towards Duke over Auburn. But the bottom line is all of that good deed that Auburn's doing with just the cluster of wins. They're 11-1 in the top 2 quads, 10-1 in Quad 1, whereas Duke is just 4-2 in Quad 1, 6-2. Duke's just not getting as many at-bats. And, of course, Duke has an additional loss compared to Auburn just losing once. Maybe if Auburn can fall again here, they have a big game coming tomorrow against Tennessee. We'll take a look, and that might be enough to get Duke on top. But for now, I think it's pretty clearly Auburn 1-2. And I'll pass it over to Brad Wachtel for 3 and 4 on the 1 line.
Yeah, Brad, let's hear your breakdown on 3 and 4 here on the one line.
Yeah, so 3 and 4 is Alabama and Tennessee. I think in terms of Alabama, when you take a look at their resume, 11-3 against Q1 and 2 opponents. I think if you take a look and see what they've done this season, they probably have the best collection of wins than any other team in the country. Beat Illinois and Houston on neutral courts. They won at North Carolina. Beat Creighton at Texas A&M, at Kentucky. That is a plethora of victories that really, really strengthen them and, put them on that 1 seed line. And then in terms of the other 1 seed, it's really close between Tennessee and Iowa State. And I think ultimately, when it's all said and done, there probably won't be 3 SEC 1 seeds, but we do this as it stands today. So as it stands today, Tennessee is a 1 seed. Reason being, you compare their resume to Iowa State, most people's top 2 seeds. Tennessee is 3-2 against Q1A opponents, whereas Iowa State's 2-2. Their record against Q1A road neutral is 3-2, whereas Iowa State is 1-2. And then overall, their metrics are slightly better. The result and the predictives are slightly better than Iowa State. So it's really, these resumes are so close. Tennessee has a win at Louisville as well as at Illinois. So when you get those wins away from home, those mean more, those carry a lot more weight, especially when they're top tier teams.
Yeah, definitely agree with that assessment there, Brad. And you mentioned Iowa State. Yes, this is for both of you guys. Who are the teams that are still realistically in the picture to push one of these 4 teams for a 1 seed as we forge forward into conference play?
Yeah, I would say, Brad, Iowa State's pretty much one. Or them and Tennessee are so close, but I do agree that Tennessee belongs on the one line above them based on a lot of the information Brad Wachtel provided. I think it's 5 teams for 4 spots as it sits today, but I mean Florida is sitting right there at 6. They're of course in the same league as Auburn, Alabama, and Tennessee. They're going to play those teams, and if they score some wins, everything can flip flop. So Florida's right there on the doorstep, and then I guess next in order would be a Kansas, but Kansas has already taken a loss to Iowa State. I think they have a little bit more work to do. Michigan State is the leader of the Big Ten, the only undefeated team left. But the problem for them, and we'll talk about the Big Ten later on the show, is just the fact that Michigan State hasn't really done too much yet away from home. They've only played a couple of teams. They've only had a couple of wins against tournament level teams. So the Big Ten schedule started off a little nice for them, but that's going to crank up here as we go. So an opportunity, I think, if Michigan State somehow steamrolled the Big Ten, I don't see that happening. But if they did, of course, they're going to be very interesting for the 1 seed discussion at some point.
Yeah, Brad, anything to add to that assessment from Rocco?
Yeah, and as Rocco said, I think Kansas is a team, even though I don't believe they are a true number 1 seed, but I think when you look at who they've beaten, and they beat Duke and Michigan State on neutral courts, 2 teams that are, obviously Duke is a number 2 seed overall right now, and Michigan State is a 3 seed and, undefeated in the Big Ten. So I think you have to look at the teams that have those types of victories, that have the highest ceiling. Do I think they're going to get there? Probably not. But they've done a lot of good work in non-conference play. So Kansas and, another team I'll still mention, I'm not going to count out Kentucky. They have 5 Q1A wins at the moment, which is an excellent number. They also beat Duke on a neutral court. So for me, those are the 2 teams that stand out, along with what Rocco had mentioned as well.
And this one for both of you guys as well. Got a couple of people in the chat chiming in. Where does Houston fall into all of this mix as far as seeding goes? And Brad, we can stick with you.
Yeah, Houston's got an interesting resume. They're undefeated in Big 12 play right now. At the current moment, 0-3 against Q1 opponents, which sticks out like a sore thumb. 6-3 against Quad 1 and 2. Their predictive metrics average out to about 2, which would lead you to believe that they should be a 1 seed. Their result metrics average out to more of about like a 4 or a 5 seed. I currently have them as a 4 seed. But look, their resume is gonna play itself out because they're in the Big 12, so they have a ton of opportunities. Either they're gonna beat the teams at the top of the Big 12. We'll get to a game that they have this weekend that could really, really increase their chances of rising up the boards. Or they're going to lose to them, but they need to pick up some quality wins over upper echelon NCAA tournament teams to really get out of that 4-5 range at the moment.
Yeah, and Rocco, now swinging it to you on the Houston front. The predictives look great. The net rating looks great. But as Brad alluded to, you're still really lacking that quality or signature win, if you will. What do you make of Kelvin Sampson's group at this point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're fine. Like Brad said, they're playing great. They had that 1-point win over UCF, but that still gives them a win over the field. UCF, spoiler alert, they're still in my first 4 to Dayton. So they have a couple wins against the field, but I think the way they perform, I mean, they absolutely hammer people at home, which is why their performance metrics are so good. Curious to see how they handle that road showdown at Kansas. Now, the reason why they're in this position in the first place, Brad, is based on the fact that they played out in the NIL tournament in Vegas, took a couple really tough, close, one of them was overtime. I think maybe 2 of them were overtime losses, and they just didn't come away with those wins that you would like to see them come down with. But they're right there performance-wise. It's not like Houston's getting blown out by anybody anytime soon. So the committee knows all these things, but you have to check certain boxes to get your way up to the 2 and 1 seed lines. A road win at Kansas certainly will flip the script. I could see them going from this 4-5 range into the top 2 by next Monday. So that just goes to show you it's January 24th. Some of these teams, Houston included, that have started with weaker conference schedules, there's still a lot of missing, I would say, immature data because I think when you watch Houston, there's a really good likelihood that they're going to end up as a 2 or a 1 seed by the end of the season.
And Rocco, staying with you, another team that we've been asked about in the chat, and I know has made waves throughout the course of this season. Florida is an interesting case study because the predictives look great. 8-2 rather against Q1 and Q2. What do you make of Todd Golden's group after they were able to escape on the road in Columbia against a really gritty South Carolina team that also took Auburn to the wire?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with Florida, Coach Golden's team there. I think. Part of their problem right now is they don't have the big road win. They have 3 road wins in quad 1 and 2 combined, but none of those teams are in the field yet or in the field at all. So that kind of hurts. They have 5 wins against the field, but they're all bubble teams: Wake Forest, Arizona State, North Carolina. So even though they have 4 quad 1 wins, that's why it's really important to do a double click into what's going on in quad 1. Not all quad wins are created equal. Mr. Faxon. So the bottom line is Florida's schedule is going to provide them several more opportunities. That we're just getting warmed up in the SEC. And if Florida is able to stay with this level of win percentage, there's no question that they're going to be right there for a 1 seed. They're only 2 spots away as we sit here today. But those are some of the things they're missing right now. And unfortunately for them, also the strength of schedule. Some of the teams they scheduled didn't end up as good as they thought preseason. They're sitting at 227 non-conference strength of schedule. That's the weakest non-conference strength of schedule in the top. You'd have to go all the way down to the 19th place team to find a weaker one. So that's hurting the Gators a little bit right now. But again, they're in the SEC. We're going to know exactly who they are by the time it's all said and done.
Yeah, there's ample opportunities in the SEC this year, which has an argument for one of the best college basketball conferences we've ever seen. Brad, are you in agreement with Rocco's assessment of Florida still looking for that signature win, if you will, in the SEC?
With him. And like you said, look at their schedule. They still get to play at Tennessee, Auburn, at Alabama, at Mississippi State. So the opportunities are there for them to really move the needle significantly. But it's clearly going to be a tough road ahead, and we'll find out how good they are.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of tantalizing basketball on the horizon. We're going to take a quick break here on Fielding the 68, and our breaks are brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. You can elevate your game, whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more. Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. We're going to have more content for you guys here on Fielding the 68 on the other side of a short break.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm, everybody. Faxon Childress alongside Brad Wachtel and Rocco Miller. And this might be everybody's favorite segment of every show that we do here on Fielding the 68. It definitely sparks the most controversy. Bubble talk. We're going to go to you first, Brad, and we're going to react to what your outlook is right now on the bubble with your last four in.
All right, so my last four in. We have Vanderbilt, Ohio State, UCF, and Wake Forest, and I'll touch on each team real quick. In terms of Vanderbilt, they beat Tennessee. Their result-based metrics average out to about 35.6. People say, what does that mean? When you take a look at teams that have gotten in the past, you want to be top 50 for sure. The team that had the worst result-based metric last year that got in was Michigan State at 47.5. Just something to keep in mind. Even though Vanderbilt has a poor non-conference strength of schedule, they are far from safe, but their resume still is better than a bunch of these other bubble teams. Ohio State, their win at Purdue was massive for me. Their top two wins against them and Kentucky are as good as any two wins of any team in the country. So while they do have 8 losses overall, which is a problem, their resume measures up to one that should be in the field at the moment. UCF is one of those teams where we got to look at the metrics, and we're going to be using that a lot. The result-based metrics is something that the committee uses when determining who is in the field, not necessarily where you're seated. But those metrics are so important to figure out who's in. And when you look at UCF, they won at Texas Tech. They won at Arizona State. They beat Texas A&M. Arizona State's a fellow bubble team as well, which is important. And they played a really strong non-conference strength of schedule. My final team in the field came as a little bit of a surprise to me, too, was Wake Forest. Wake Forest, their result-based metrics average out to about 34.5. Their predictives are poor, but again, that does not matter when it comes to getting into the field. Wake Forest, the reason why their predictives are so poor, they played their guarantee games in non-conference play were against very poor teams, and they didn't blow them out. They only beat them by 10 to 15 points, and that's why their numbers are so poor at the moment. But they beat North Carolina, and they beat Michigan on a neutral court, and when you start comparing all of these bubble teams, that win is as good of a win as any other bubble team has. And that's why they get the ultimate shift into my last team in the field.
Yeah, it's difficult to not acknowledge what Wake Forest has been able to accomplish under Steve Forbes this year. And ever since the insertion of Tyler Johnson into the lineup and him starting to be more utilized frequently in a ball handling role, the Demon Deacons have looked like something to be reckoned with. So definitely a team to keep our eye on going forward. Rocco, as we swing things to you, how are you breaking down the bubble and what are you seeing on your last four in?
Yeah, Faxon. Well, I'm glad you asked it that way because it's a complicated situation at this point in time, not as straightforward as just looking at the seed list. And I think it's an important opportunity to educate the audience on how the actual selection process works. So the actual committee will go through an entire selection process first, where they nail down the right 68 teams. And really, they're just picking the 37 at large because you have 31 that are automatic bids. So once those 68 are solved, then you go into what's called seeding the teams, the seeding process and scrubbing the board. So that's exactly how I do my forecasting. I try to emulate the committee at all places. It's really not my opinion. It's about what I expect them to do. And when you go in and do the seeding process, a team like Vanderbilt, who Brad had in his last four out, I think appropriately so, or sorry, last four in, appropriately so. Well, they're extreme. They have 331 ranked non-conference strength of schedule. History tells us if you're that close, you're probably getting left out. But right now, there's just not any better options. And I had this whole episode on Monday with you guys talking about how I don't think more than 11 SEC teams can get in due to the math of every conference game somebody taking a loss. Well, I went against my word today, and I had to put Vanderbilt in somewhere. And just due to the fact that they're a better performance team than the last four in that you'll see on the screen, which are Drake, Wake Forest, UCF, and Pittsburgh, Vanderbilt skyrocketed back up to a 10 seed. But again, they would probably be the most controversial out of mine. I feel very solid about Drake as my first team in. They would be sent to Dayton in this case, based on the fact that their performance numbers are not great. But I think they should feel secure as in the field as we sit here today. They did beat that Vanderbilt team in a championship game of the Charleston Classic by 11 points. They have road wins at Q1 Bradley, the best road win they can get in their league. And the Kansas State game that I covered in Kansas City actually qualifies as a true road game because Kansas State hosted that game in the T-Mobile Center. And so they're 7-1 in road neutral games. The Drake Bulldogs team has done everything you could ask a team from the Valley to do. They do have the two bad losses, home Murray State at UIC, but they're sitting there 8-2 in meaningful games. It's a surefire pick in terms of the rest of the bubble. I do have Wake Forest next. Brad did a good job talking about their case, but I do feel solidly that they belong in. Their performance stuff is less important than what they've actually gotten done, and that's just enough right now, and really no bad. Obviously 15-4 on the year. 8 of those wins are still meaningful. UCF, the next team, I think, they're a little bit unicornish based on the fact that they're way low in the predictives. Again, that doesn't matter for resume. The thing that the committee would care about the most is the fact that they went to Texas Tech, they went to Arizona State, and they beat Texas A&M at home. 3 clear wins against the field, 2 of them in true road games. Nobody on the bubble has that in terms of the 2 true road games against field level competition. They're over 500 in all the key areas. They're solid enough on the road. I feel good about UCF. And then Pittsburgh was my last team in on Monday. They haven't moved at all. So I'm sticking with Pittsburgh right there as that last team in.
Yeah, I think Jeff Capel's group has a good case to be that last team in as of right now, especially with some of the injury adversity they've dealt with throughout the course of the season. We're going to take a quick look now at the consensus last 4 in. And Brad, we'll throw it to you after we take a look at the consensus because we've seen yours, we've seen Rocco's. We're going to look at the consensus. And my question to you, and then we'll go to Rocco as well. Are there any teams that are currently on the bubble picture that you don't feel like we've given enough coverage? Who maybe is a team that could play their way onto the bubble? Is there a team with a challenging horizon on the forefront that could play their way off the bubble? Talk to us a little bit about the teams that are kind of hovering on the outside looking in, Brad.
Right now, since it is the end of January, there are a ton of teams that can make a move. And especially when you want to try and figure out a team that we don't mention, you got to go to the bigger conferences. And because those are the teams that have the opportunities. So for me, I look at, a team like Texas. I think Texas has a chance to easily get back in the field if they can make some headway in conference play. Teams are switching conferences every year now. You forget where they are, but obviously in the SEC, they can definitely make a headway. They haven't beaten any sort of upper echelon teams in that league. At Oklahoma is probably their best win at the moment. They just beat Missouri, which helps, but they got to do some work. And then I would say probably a team like, let's see, I'm just going through my list, and I would say Nebraska could definitely get back in the picture because of their win at Creighton earlier in the season. They're not really in the mix at the moment after a couple of really bad weeks. But I think you just have to look at the teams that earned earlier quality wins at the beginning of the season, or the teams that have the significant opportunities. Another team that we haven't mentioned that does have some solid wins already is Dayton. Dayton beat UConn on a neutral court, and they beat Marquette. Dayton's problem is that they have 2 bad losses, and they're just 3-4 against Q1 and 2 teams. And the Atlantic 10 doesn't provide that many opportunities. So they're really going to have to win a ton of games in league play when they're not off to the best of starts. But, as we say, the season is still relatively young.
Yeah, definitely still a very young season. Before we forge forward into looking at our first four out, Rocco, anything to add on the bubble conversation about teams that could potentially play their way onto the bubble?
Yeah, two quick hitters, just teams that aren't in my first four out at this point. But Xavier, of course, getting that win at Marquette and having that meltdown where St. John's just refused to lose, that set them back again. But Xavier's got the road Marquette win, which is the best win right now in the Big East that you can get. And they've got a home win against Wake Forest. So they actually have 2 wins against the current field that I have. Problem is out of 13 meaningful games, they've only won 5 of them. And so, lots of work to do. And the Big East has limited chances. They've got to get a UConn, a St. John's when they get another chance at those types of teams that are in. But if they can take care of all their other Big East business, Xavier can certainly play their way back in. The other one is kind of out of left field, but really coming on strong here this last week, the Santa Clara Broncos. I think it's a very interesting case because the actual NCAA team sheet lists 3 different resume-based metrics. I think I tend to look at the strength of resume, and I really love the wins above bubble addition this year. But there's still the KPI, and I get that it's overlooked in some cases. But the KPI right now has Santa Clara number 27 in the country, which is suggesting they're not only a bubble team, but they're actually like a top 8 seed, a top 7 seed. So you would at least get a conversation, I think, especially with Stu Jackson, the WCC commissioner, serving on the committee about the Broncos. They, of course, the big win at Gonzaga, scored the most points in the history of the kennel, putting up 103 on the Bulldogs. So they need the Bulldogs to start playing well because that will make that win look even better later. But they also just wiped out Washington State last night. They're all over the map with their numbers because they have 4 bad losses, or they at least have 4 losses to teams that are not in the field, starting with North Dakota State at home in a heartbreaking OT game. They lost by 2 to Stanford at the buzzer. They lost by 3 to LMU last week, and they lost their championship games narrowly to Washington in their MTE. So they're all over the map, but nobody's really, they looked the part. They had the guts to go to McNeese, and they won at McNeese. And the WCC is fatter than it's ever been, Faxon. And so there's going to be more and more opportunities. In fact, they're going to Oregon State tomorrow. So just keep your eye on Santa Clara.
Yeah, definitely some more quality than we're used to in the WCC. And obviously Santa Clara has proven they can play up to competition with some of the best. We'll see if they can continue to stack some wins as they forge forward into conference play. Time now to take a look at our first 4 out. We'll start with you, Rocco, this time. Talk us through what you're seeing on the board about teams that are on the outside looking at.
Yeah, sure. These 4 for me were pretty easy decisions. So I'm actually not sweating too hard right now based on the options that did make it in. So North Carolina, clearly, the scales have tipped where the bad is outweighing the good quite clearly. They're 1-7 in 8 games against tournament level competition. The 1 win was in the CBS Sports Classic against UCLA. Obviously, it's a good win, but they have nothing else to really supplement that. Their road wins in the top 2 quads were Notre Dame and NC State. Important, good wins, but not tournament caliber wins on the road. And they've fallen short over and over again in their other big-time games. So they're 0-6 in their hardest games. And you got to get all the way into quad 3 to get a decent record where they're 9-8 in those games. So North Carolina, of course, taking the home Stanford loss as well, really kind of punctured them last weekend. So right now they're pretty clearly out to me, but they're a good win away from probably being back in. And I'd say that's the same for Indiana in my case. I know the consensus put Indiana in. I certainly would disagree. Indiana is kind of yo-yoing back and forth from in to out. They take a loss to Northwestern after we had them in on Monday. And right now they're 2-6 in quad 1, but those 2 wins are against teams, in my opinion, are not in the field. I know I also disagree that the field has Ohio State in. No offense, Brad, but I think in Ohio State's case, they're 5-8 in meaningful games. They've got to get a better, closer to 500 record. They do have the gaudy wins, the Buckeyes. But I think, if some of these things will swing for Indiana in the right direction, that could also be like a rising tides lifts all boats scenario for them in the Big Ten bubble. But there's a lot of other Big Ten bubble teams too, like Brad mentioned Nebraska, and Northwestern's floating around there somewhere. So we'll see. Indiana's a interesting case, but right now I keep them on the outside, just being 2-6 in their 8 most important games. And Texas is on the outside for me. Brad mentioned them earlier. They do have the 2 tournament caliber wins with road Oklahoma, home Mizzou. They're 6-6 in meaningful games, so I guess you could put them in based on that. But right now, I have more SEC teams in than I feel comfortable with as it is. So pretty easy to keep Texas out until we see another result. Of course, every result in this league shakes things up quite drastically, as we talked about at the top with Texas A&M's big move this week. And then last, I have Cincinnati, and I think Cincinnati quite clearly is out. They're 5-6 in meaningful games. That's top 3 quadrants. Their only win against the field is Arizona State, in my opinion, and that's a home win last Saturday. Their strength of schedule is not very strong. They do have a decent road win at Colorado, and they are 4-3 away from home. So you can tell Cincinnati gets BYU tomorrow. If they keep chipping away at it, you can see them on the right side of the bubble sooner than later. So I put them in that next 4 group. But quite honestly, like Brad said earlier, there's a way longer list. It really comes down to, are you in or are you out? And these 4 to me are clearly out.
Yeah, there's a laundry list of teams, it feels like, that have a chance to get in. And Brad, we're going to throw things to you now. How are you seeing the board when relating to the first 4 out?
Yeah, so Rocco and I definitely have some similarities in Indiana and North Carolina. And just to add one more thing on North Carolina, and everybody seems to want to say they're going to get in because of their name. It just doesn't work like that. North Carolina is 0-6 against Q1A opponents. They're 0-5 against Q1A opponents away from home, and they're 1-7 against Q1 opponents. They do have one of the best non-conference strength of schedules in the country, but guess what? You got to beat somebody, and they don't have many. They only have 1 or 2 quality wins. You only have 1 win over the field in beating UCLA on a neutral court. And up until the last week, UCLA was trending downward. So they got a lot of work to do in a league that does not provide many opportunities. So every game for them, win or lose, is going to be massive. And then the other 2 teams that I have out as my first 4 out, Arizona State. I think their resume is pretty solid. I like to look at, most importantly, who have you beaten? And they have those wins. They beat New Mexico on a neutral court. They beat St. Mary's on a neutral court. They won at West Virginia. But you also have to find some separating factors. And for me, when it came to Arizona State and Drake, the thing that kept me from putting them in the field at the moment, things can change in a day or two, was the fact that they each have a bad loss. And my other bubble teams, none of them have a bad loss on their resume, which I think matters. In terms of Drake, Rocco made some great points about Drake, and beating Vanderbilt is a quality win. The issue is, if Drake is going to get a large bid, it means they're going to suffer another bad loss at some point in the season. Because obviously they win their conference tournament, they're getting in no matter what. So what is that going to do to their resume? If they go out and win out and lose 1 more game, can they get in? Yes, absolutely. But you're playing with fire, and when you're in a league that doesn't provide many opportunities, you just got to keep winning, day in and day out. And it's unfortunate for a lot of these mid majors because Drake is obviously, if you look at the result metrics, they're a team that should be in the field right now.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there. And now time to take a look at our consensus first 4 out. Brad, we can stick with you on this. Any additional points before we head to break on any team you feel like maybe we haven't mentioned in the first 4 out? I know Texas got a nod earlier as a team that has a chance to play their way back onto the bubble with some quality opportunities on the horizon. And obviously they picked up a big win this past week.
No, I think it's pretty solid. I think all of these teams you can certainly make a case for to be in the field right now. I think if the season ended today, there would be a lot of people there'd be a high variance in terms of teams that are in the field and out of the field because there are so many teams in the mix. It's not always like this. So we're really dissecting these resumes at the moment. And again, it's going to work itself out, especially with these high major teams that have opportunities. Like you take a look at Arizona State, currently 2-5 record in conference. And I keep saying conference record, it doesn't matter. it doesn't matter to an extent. You know, if you're finishing with 6 conference wins, you're in trouble. So like these teams are in, you know, these high major leagues. You could go on a losing streak over the course of 2 weeks, and your resume completely blows up. So I like where we're at. I like the consensus for the most part. I think we're all on the same page with the same teams, and I have no issue with either of those teams, any of those teams being in or out at the moment.
Rocco, anything to add after seeing both Brad's first 4 out and the consensus?
Yeah, I mean, basically, like, take it with a grain of salt. There's 6 more weeks of basketball on all fronts, and these things are going to work themselves out in most cases. We'll get to the very end. We might be able to debate 2 or 3 of these teams by then. So it's not too controversial. You know, we're basically just going through the process in our own successful ways, and there's more than one way to get there. And I think the other important thing is it's a committee of 12 people that have to come to a decision together. So this is a good exercise to have, that we have multiple bracketologists to hear other opinions. You want to know what to like about a team and what not to like about a team, and bring that case, and then you compare and figure out what you like better. And so sometimes if you're just doing this on your own all the time, you get lost on what maybe a group think would look like. And this really is a group think exercise. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's spot on analysis as always from you, Rocco. It's time to take a quick break, brought to you by our friends at Rhythm as always. You can identify mid-majors and underdogs that could upset the field and shake up your bracket, and access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. The final segment of this installment of Fielding the 68 on the other side of a short break.
Now that the college basketball season is in full swing, you need to make sure that you have access to the best betting tool on the market, the Rhythm app. Spelled RITHMM, is a data-backed app that uses AI and analytics to identify inefficiencies in betting lines and the player prop market that will allow you, the user, to profit. You can create customized, analytics-driven betting models tailored to your personal preferences as a bettor. Users have access to up-to-the-second against-the-spread data. And if you're like me and you understand pictures better than numbers on a screen, Rhythm's internal trend analysis provides you with the kind of graphs that will allow you to evaluate past results and project future performance in a visual way. Every Division I college basketball team is included in Rhythm's metrics. Free subscribers to the Field of 68 Daily will get 25% off for a Rhythm subscription. Use the QR code on the screen to sign up, or download at the link in the description.
We welcome you back in. It's the final segment of this installment of Fielding the 68. Appreciate everybody tuning in as always. And it's now time to kind of sort through the mess of the Big Ten as of right now. There's a lot of different teams that feel like, you know, they've got a puncher's chance to maybe even catch Michigan State to potentially win the league, but there's still a lot of sorting out at the top of the league that needs to be done. Brad, we can start with you. Talk to me about the Big Ten and how you're seeing the teams at the top of the board.
Yeah, I think there's been a little bit of separation from the teams at the top. You got Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan, Oregon, Wisconsin, and Illinois, to me, are your top 6 right there, with UCLA and Maryland right behind. But obviously there's a ton of quality teams in this league. Then you also have the bottom of the league, which the bottom couple teams aren't particularly great when you look at Minnesota or Washington. I think it's important for a lot of these teams to avoid that dreaded loss, you know, especially at home to one of those teams, because that could really be damaging to your resume. Taking care of business at home is key, and the teams that win road games, like Maryland did last night, the teams that win road games against the better teams in the league, that will shift your resume the most. And for me, Maryland was actually a team that was on the bubble prior to last night's game, and I watched that entire game, and I watched them obliterate. And I know Illinois wasn't at full strength, but Illinois is still a really good team, and to do that on the road, I think that holds a ton of weight, and that's something the committee certainly will, put an asterisk next to as a major win.
Yeah, Rocco, now throwing things to you. Talk to me a little bit about how you're seeing this Big Ten picture shake out this year. Obviously, the addition of Oregon as well and a couple other teams has really created another power league in college basketball, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten's been pretty awesome the last few years, even without these four from the West. Now we just have an absolute super, and that creates even more imbalance. Like I think the Big Ten before already had a pretty big difference in scheduling, and now there's even more imbalance. So the West Coast teams, they're going to all play each other twice, and then they play everybody else once. And so every group of teams that they built the schedule for, they only play three other teams twice. Everybody else you just play once. So these strength of schedules within the conference are drastically different in a lot of cases. So I think that's a big story to pay attention to as we go forward. But as it stands today, like I mentioned earlier, Michigan State's the team that's unblemished. But again, they don't have a road win against a tournament level team yet. Their best win right now, you could argue, is even at least away from East Lansing, is the neutral court North Carolina win. That's a bubble level win. But just the fact that they only have 2 overall losses, they've crept their way up to the top. But I feel like it's a very shaky floor for the Spartans if they, hit a losing streak at any point in time. And I think, more of a higher floor would be Purdue, who went all the way to Eugene, Oregon, got the big road win. And even though they fell at home against Ohio State, that really good road win will always outweigh a slip up at home, like at the Ohio State level. So I think if Purdue is like a higher floor team, they'll have another opportunity tonight against Michigan. And Michigan's end, that's another opportunity to add a big road win. They've already got the critical road wins at Wisconsin, at UCLA. We'll see if the Wolverines can add a third big one. And so that's really what it comes down to. Who can you actually beat on the road? In bracketology, and especially at the top of the pecking order, you're separated by who you beat away from home. You're expected to win big games at home. So it really doesn't move the needle a whole lot in most cases, unless you're beating like the number 1 or 2 team in the country. So go win some games away from home, and that's how your team's going to jump up. That holds true whether you're at the top of the board or in the bubble picture or falling out of the bubble picture when you take a home loss. So that's always the key for the race. And I agree with those 6 at the top with Brad. I have a slightly different order, but where we are right now, like there's so much horse trading going on in the Big Ten because these teams are so even in their different groups.
Yeah, you mentioned the different groups, and Rocco, we'll stick with you in this. Anything to expand on the teams that are currently floating around the bubble in the Big Ten, i.e. Indiana, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Northwestern?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Maryland was my first team out on Monday, so they drastically changed their entire outlook in one game. That's very difficult to do, but it just so happened to have all the things packed into one beautiful package that they needed. So Maryland's safe for now. And then I think UCLA, they also have a road win at Oregon. They're only 7-6 against the top 3 quads, clearly in right now. But UCLA has another bad road trip or two. That 500 record is really something to pay attention to in these power conferences. So I would include UCLA in that, potential bubble discussion if they fall further. And then Indiana and Ohio State, we covered them pretty well, I thought. In Nebraska's case, as Brad mentioned, they have the road Creighton win, they have the home UCLA, so they've got 2 wins. And they're 6-5 in meaningful games, so they're right there. They just need something to flip. I think the home loss to Brad's Rutgers boys that hurt a little bit because it threw off some of their numbers, and now they've got a little bit of a negative loss that they have to own, at least for the time being, unless Rutgers can improve. But yeah, Northwestern, they've got wins at home against Illinois and Maryland. Like I said, Northwestern's going to have to get some road wins, and that goes for everybody. And I think another team worth mentioning right now is USC. USC got that upset win at Illinois to kickstart things. They already have a win at Washington. Again, it's not much for the resume, but it's a win over top 2 quads, which you're looking for in the bubble. They won at Nebraska this week. So now USC actually has 3 wins in the top 2 quads, true road wins. They're just 1-5 against tournament teams, and they're only 5-7 in meaningful games. So if USC can get hot for a couple of weeks, you might see them sneak in.
Yeah, Musselman definitely trying to rally the troops right now out there in Los Angeles. Brad, anything from you to add on the Big Ten teams currently in the bubble picture?
I just want to say I love the call by you, Rocco, about USC. Like we said earlier, wins on the road carry so much weight. And with Illinois and, beating Illinois and Nebraska on the road is big for them if they could, continue to play well and make a little run. I like that as an outside chance bubble team to find their way in the field at some point. But I think Rocco covered it pretty well. Look, even teams that we don't mention, and, Rocco mentioned my Rutgers guys, nobody's eliminated right now. It's January 24th, and a team like Rutgers, you look at their resume, it's not good. Is their season over? No, their season's not over. The reason is because they have opportunities. I didn't plan on talking about Rutgers today, but all you got to do is just take a look at their schedule. Michigan State at Northwestern, Michigan, Illinois, at Maryland, and they also play at Oregon. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if they happen to go on a winning streak, absolutely they could play their way into the field. But that might be talking a little crazy.
Hey, there's no such thing as talking crazy with the state we're in right now. Anything can happen. A lot of basketball to be played. It's time now to head into some team deep dives. There are a couple intriguing case studies that we want to bring to kind of the spotlight, if you will, here on Fielding the 68. Brad, we can stick with you to start things out. Talk to me a little bit about Texas Tech and what's going on in Lubbock right now.
Yeah, Texas Tech has an interesting resume. When you take a look and do a deep dive on them, their predictive metrics are top 12 at the moment, which leads you to believe, they're as good as a 3 seed right now. Their result metrics are around 30, which is solid. But then we start to look at who they've beaten. And right now, their best win, their wins against the field, which is an important note, they beat Arizona at home. Okay, not great. Their other wins, they've won road games, though, which is important, even though the road games that they've won are against teams that probably won't be in the field when it's all said and done. They beat Cincinnati on the road. They beat BYU on the road. They beat Utah on the road. They won at Kansas State. So while those are not NCAA tournament teams, most of them half of them are quad 1 teams. Some of them could become quad 1 teams with a hot week or two. So they've taken care of business away from home, 4-0 on the road at the moment, which is, it's so hard to win road games. That's tremendous. But the question for them is, how much can they move up? I currently have them as a 7 seed at the moment. They can move up a lot based on who they play. And their schedule dictates, playing in the Big 12, that they have the opportunities to move up. Just taking a look at their schedule real quick, they still get to play at Houston. They still play Arizona on the road, who they've beaten. Arizona State, they got at Kansas, they got Houston again. So they have a ton of opportunities. The downside of it, where they could still tumble, is if they don't beat those teams. If they don't get any wins over the NCAA tournament teams, their resume could drop them to out of the field before you know it. So they're an interesting team that has beaten the teams that are on the outskirts, but now we got to start beating some teams that are going to be playing in the NCAA tournament.
Rocco, coming to you now. Great analysis, as always, from you, Brad. Talk to me a little bit about the Louisville Cardinals. I'm a Clemson guy myself. That's still our only league loss, and Pat Kelsey's got a really, really good team this year out in Louisville.
Man, they're a freight train right now. 9 wins in a row, Faxon, and all their big tests are behind them, for better or for worse. You would want to start playing your big, like North Carolina, Duke, big brand games, even play your Clemson boys, Faxon, going forward the way they're playing right now. But unfortunately, again, another really huge conference with tons of teams, and Louisville coming off of a last place season, basically. They got dealt a last place schedule, so that's the background behind it. Now the test becomes similar to a team like Memphis in a very down American. They're going to have to get up for teams that they're expected to beat almost the rest of the way. They'll have a nice test next Tuesday. Their next game, they have a bye this weekend, but on Tuesday they'll get Wake Forest at home. I'm sure the KFC Yum Center is going to be jumping with that 9-game win streak. But after that, going to places like Georgia Tech and Boston College next, and then later going to NC State and Notre Dame, who are both pretty feisty clubs themselves, and having to, play Pitt at home later in the year, and Stanford, who's getting better and better in the finale. Those are just games they can't just walk through. And I don't think they will. Like, everything we're seeing right now doesn't lead us to believe anything like that, but it's just the psychology and the mental day-to-day of college basketball. You would expect us, for unbeknownst reasons. So Louisville's just really got to be careful with that. I do think if somehow they can just get to the finish line with all these wins. Now, again, Pittsburgh and Wake are the only teams currently in the field that they play, and they get them both at home. So none of those particular wins are going to move the needle per se. But around them, the teams are being compared against, like your Wisconsins, your Memphis, your St. John's, et cetera. Likelihood is they're going to fall at some point, if not multiple times, probably. And Louisville will naturally, organically move up. And we've also seen in recent tournament selections that the seeding will matter a lot in terms of their performances. So, it will behoove Louisville to pound teams. They'll play Miami in a couple Saturdays, and they might need to win that game by 50. But if they pound teams, they can keep moving up the seed list. Right now, they're a safe 6 seed on my list, but so much of that has to do with performance. So they're actually in this interesting case, as long as they don't take a bad loss, to where they just need to pound people, and they can actually move up the board.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there, Rocco. And time now, guys. We can stick with you, Rocco, first. Games to watch this upcoming weekend. College ball. There's a lot of great games on the slate, but what particularly is catching your eye this weekend?
Well, there's a lot of directions we can go. I'll stay on theme with some of our bubble talk, because that's always the most intriguing. It's what can really flip the bracket next week. And we'll start in the SEC. It's already round 2 of the most anticipated rivalry with this realignment in the SEC, with Texas A&M making the trip to Texas after they already played them in College Station. Texas needs like one other additional juicy win to get into the field, I would say. That certainly should do the trick if Texas can get that one. Cincinnati, they were my fourth to last team out. They're going to go at BYU. Now, BYU is not a tournament level team, but they have a strong net for an NIT level team, and it's a very difficult place to win playing at altitude, which really impressed me, by the way, about Texas Tech going up there and beating both BYU and Utah. We'll see if Cincinnati can get that win. That might be enough to tip their scales, because they need the road wins. You have Xavier, a team we didn't mention earlier. They're going to host a slumping UConn team. Xavier really has got to get that win. It's not a road game, but it's a win against the field that they need, and they can't keep taking losses. So keep your eye on that. And then I would also add Arizona State, who just climbed back into my field. They get a chance to hit a grand slam in a rowdy environment, I'm assuming, with Iowa State coming to the desert. Watch out for the curtain of distraction during Iowa State free throws. It's going to be a fun time down there. But if Arizona State gets that win, I think they can collectively breathe for about a week. So good luck to the Sun Devils.
Yeah, and Brad, to you, what has your eye this weekend on the college hoop slate?
A couple other bubble games that Rocco didn't mention. Kentucky at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, to me, you're playing a quality team in Kentucky, but they have a slim margin for error. So a loss to Kentucky, while wouldn't be a bad loss, could end up knocking them out of the field based on how the other bubble teams do this weekend. So that's a game to watch. Duke at Wake Forest, and again, Wake Forest was my last team in the field. The ACC, you have so many opportunities, and this is a massive one for Wake Forest. If they can beat Duke, they will put themselves in some really, really good position to making the NCAA tournament, just because, Duke is a number 1 seed. And then a couple other games that I really like. Obviously we're looking at Houston and Kansas. As we mentioned earlier, Houston has this opportunity to pick up a significant win to really not skyrocket, but I have them as a 4 seed right now, but to really get up to the 3, potentially even the 2 seed line. Michigan at Purdue tonight should be a great game. Projected 4 seed versus a projected 3 seed for me. And then finally, Tennessee at Auburn, which is, Auburn by all means is the best team in the country. So a win here for Tennessee would really solidify their standing as a number 1 seed.
Yeah, there's a lot definitely to watch this upcoming weekend in college hoops. Hey, Rocco, great job. Brad, great job. It was great getting to do this with you guys. This has been another installment of Fielding the 68. Hope you guys enjoyed all the bracketology talk. And as always, Fielding the 68 was brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. Enjoy the weekend of college hoops, everybody, and we will see you on Monday for more bracketology talk.